on the pod. We're going to continue in our book reading by M.F. Cusack. She was a nun of Kinmar, or Kinmare, I don't know how you pronounce it. It is The Black Pope, A History of the Jesuits. We are in Chapter 7, Life in a Jesuit College. Life in a French Jesuit College. Okay. Life in a French Jesuit College. The narrative of M. Dewicki, his retreat, choice of a state of life, how made, mistaken ideas of perfection, God made us to live in the world and not to fly from it, the Navitate at Pau, early rising, how the day is spent in a French Jesuit Navitate, how the tempers of the novices are tried, penances, stern rules about silence, every human feeling crushed under an iron discipline, the Jesuit idea of Christian perfection, the Tourneur Rodriguez, all studies carefully prescribed, obedience, dinner, well-fed, the lapidarium or stoning, how performed, bad results of Jesuit training. It excites all the worst passions of the young novice, makes him a good Jesuit, but not a good man. The silentium magis, watching and prying, the trials of recreation. A short description of life in a French Jesuit college may prove interesting, above all, as it is taken from a narrative of personal experience. There is but little difference in the mode of life, save what comes of unavoidable necessity and from differences of national customs and climate. The rule of the Jesuits is wooden and unalterable. M. Dewicki commences his narrative with an account of his retreat. As an account of a retreat has been already given, it is omitted here, but we may again remark on the want of common sense in making the time of a retreat one for deciding the future, for the conditions under which a retreat is made are by no means those which would enable a clear and wise decision to be made. The object of the retreat apparently is to make a choice between the service of God and the service of the world. But Christ drew no hard and fast line, to say so reverently, between the service of God and the service of humanity. His disciples were ever exhorted to be in the world, but not of it, to declare the world which God has made for his creatures to live in, to be an accursed place where there is nothing but danger to the soul, is not true in fact or in religion. We should certainly pray, and pray with all earnestness, that we desire to be guided by God in the choice of a state of life, but to work ourselves up deliberately into a condition of spiritual exaltation or depression is not the way to strengthen the judgment. Hence, it is that so many vocations which are decided in this fashion prove defective and a cause of much after misery. Paw, P-A-U, so I'm assuming it's paw, may be taken as a type for faux pas, paw may be taken as a type of French houses of the order, from which type they never recede very far. It may not be worthwhile to follow step by step a day passed into the Navitate. A brother rises a few minutes before 4 o'clock in the morning, dresses hastily, rings the bell, and passes through all the rooms, saying in each, Benedicamus Domino, to which Deo gratias. Having been answered, he lights a candle, placed overnight for him, and passes on. The moment the bell rings, you hear a series of jumps on the floor, some dress more, some less likely, but all, hearing the voice of God in the bell, instantly obey. And should the visitor who passes through the rooms a quarter of an hour after find anybody still in bed, it would certainly be a case of illness. They throw away the water in which they have washed down a sink, walking on tiptoe. The reason for this peculiarity is that the master of the novices thought that one of the best means to inoculate silence. It was a rule often broken. As soon as the rapid toilet of the novices is over, they hurry down to the orator to visit the Holy Sacrament and say their morning prayers. If not ready by 4:25, they must not go in for fear of disturbing the others. During this service, not a movement is permitted, even when bitten by fleas, very common in the south of France. This immovability amounts almost to torture. After these prayers, they proceed to make their beds. Every bed untidily arranged is liable to be pulled down. Everything is done to try the temper of the novices. Although the bed is perfectly well made, it is pulled down to get him to make it again. Sometimes secret orders are given, and he is set upon and teased for trifles by 5 or 6 novices in office. In other cases, when he is too weakly and sensitively attached to the master, the latter treats him for months together with affected coldness, never finds time to speak with him, and so on. Every weak point of every character is soon found out, and war waged against it in different ways. If it be serious and no progress be visible after some time, the novices receives notice to quit. Mass is heard at 6. The novices remain kneeling all the morning, except from the gospel to the Sanctus bell, during which they stand. Their attitude is the following: head slightly bent forward, neither to the right nor to the left, eyes cast down, body straight as an arrow, hands folded in each other. By the by, this attitude they are required, or rather counseled, to keep at all times, as far as possible, except of instance when either hands or eyes are required for useful purposes. These may be looked upon as miserable minute, reducing every Jesuit to the state of a machine, grinding every particle of individuality out of him, and unworthy of Loyola's genius. These practices, particularly the rules of modesty, appeared extremely important to St. Ignatius, and he paid more attention to them than to any other matters, seemingly of greater importance. His idea was Jesuita alter Jesus, and therefore he wished the Jesuits to imitate the exterior of Jesus as far as they could. He laid down those rules according to the ideal that he himself had formed. After Mass from 6:30 to 7:30, the novices repair to their rooms in order to read their commentary on the Holy Scriptures. At 7:30, they go to breakfast, an excellent meal. At 7:45, the bell calls all hands upstairs. The novices, standing in 2 lines in the passage, await orders of the director of manual work, from whom, as from the hand of God, they are to accept whatever he tells them to do. Every time she writes from, she puts form. I wonder why that is. Obviously, it's a typo. So let me reread that line. At 7:45, the bell calls all hands upstairs. The novices, standing in 2 lines in the passage, awaits orders of the director of manual work, from whom, as from the hand of God, they are to accept whatever he tells them to do. For 3/4 of an hour, the novices are all busily engaged. some working in the garden, some drawing the wine in the cellar, some in the sacristy and orator waxing the floors, some in the lecture room making disciplines, chains, and rosaries, others helping in the refectory or the kitchen. But 9:30 has struck and the bell rings. At once, leaving the bottle wine half filled, a link of a chain half formed, or a reed half pulled out, all the novices, with the admonitor at their head, speed to the garden with Rodriguez's treatise on Christian perfection. The admonitor threads the alleys of the garden, and all follow close behind him in single file, like a flock of geese or convicts, walking faster or more slowly according to his pace, turning when he turns, and taking care at the same time to read Rodriguez and not to tread on the heels of those before him. This exercise, called Tornor Rodriguez, though ridiculous enough in outward seeming, is not without its motive. It is done for exercise of the body. From 9 to 10 is a lecture upon spiritual subjects, being in general an explanation of the rules of the society given by a master. Then one novice is required to give an abstract of what was said at the last lecture. After this, the master drops his voice, says a short prayer, and goes out. The lecture is ended. Then follows the repetition of the conference, a most strange scene. Groups of novices are formed by threes or fours, as the admonitor tells them off. A novice in each gives an account of what has been said. Each novice raises his voice to be heard above the others. The lecture room seems a bedlam. I don't know what that means. A visit to the orator follows. The novices again proceed in single file to the garden, there to get by heart a few verses of scripture. Saint Ignatius prescribed all studies in the novitiate except an exercise of memory, to prevent that faculty from rusting by disuse. That all studies are carefully prescribed in the novitiate, I know very well. M. de Wicke says, if a novice leaves a room, he must inform the ancient of the room where he has been. The term ancient does not imply advance in years. It is the custom in all Roman Catholic convents and colleges to ask permission of the brother or sister who has been the longest time in the convent, and whoever is the eldest present is so asked, when the regular superior is absent. The object is to teach the practice of humility. If no one was in the room when he left it, he must say on his return where he has been. 11 o'clock strikes. It is the hour for the pronunciation class. A novice presides over this exercise. From the beginning, Loyola accustoms them to obey those who are not above them in station or age, in order that later on in life, old fathers may reverence a young superior quite as much as an aged one, and not inquire whether the rector is a professed father or only a coadjutor. At 11:45, examination of consciences, reflect and silent of his conduct by each novice. At 12, the midday bell, dinner, a good meal with a pint of wine ahead, a book reading during the time. In the evening at supper is read a history of Jesuit fathers, experiences called monologue, adventures of missionaries, such as Father Anquita, full of the miracles he worked. We find Father Anquita thaumaturgizing, if I may use the expression. He left certain provisions under the care of 2 jaguars. They watched them some weeks. He walked under the water. He caused a roast pigeon to come to life and fly away. For my own part, says Dewiki, I think one should never admit any such facts, whether miracles, spiritualistic phenomena, or assertions about thought transference, until it becomes unreasonable not to believe them. Dinner being ended, the Holy Sacrament is visited again in order to prepare for the most difficult exercise of the day, the recreation. While I call it the most difficult exercise is evident enough, for an almost impossible combination of virtues is required to pass it correctly. The multitude of virtues, charity, modesty, cordiality, gaiety, self collection, piety, and I know not how many besides, required for recreation to be properly passed, has in those cases an unsuccessful result. The difficulty is much increased by the fact that no one is never allowed to choose one's companions. To do so would be a most flagrant breach of fraternal charity. Except on festivals, bands of 3 or 4 novices are made by the admonitor, and he is instructed beforehand by the master to put the most contrary characters together on purpose that their tempers may be tried. The exercise of modesty or of charity, which ought regularly to take place once a week instead of a conference. A novice designated by the master goes down on his knees in the middle of the room and listens to whatever may be said against him. All such are questioned, are bound in conscience to state whatever defect they have noticed in his conduct, such as our brother makes too much noise in eating, he talks too loud. This form of penance is practiced in some way or other in all convents and colleges, but it has been much modified of late years, except in the Jesuit novitiates on account of the serious heartburnings and anger to which it gave rise. In some convents, it is called the lapidarium or stoning, and is supposed to be performed in honor of the stoning of Christ by the Jews. The words of censure addressed to the novice by those around being the substitution for stones. It may be added that most of these practices of humiliation are carried out in the colleges where priests are trained. The present writer heard an amusing story from a priest who had been educated in Maynooth about the use of the expression benedictum domino. A new night porter had been placed in the dormitories. There was then a professor named Donahue, who was for some reason very unpopular. Some of the students, who were after all boys suffering from this drastic system of regression of every natural feeling and enjoyment of Ruth, thought it a good opportunity to get even with the obnoxious professor. They went to the new porter and told him that the professor was very peculiar or particular about the pronunciation of Latin, and that when he came to call the benedictum domino, he may say it very plainly, or he would be very angry indeed. But they taught High to say maledictum Donahue, which he did with great and grave emphasis, to the no small delight of the conspirators. Little remains to be said about the afternoon. After the visit to the chapel, by which recreation ends, as it began, there is once a week an exercise of tones. The tones are a short sermon. It is learnt by heart and recited. From being badly delivered, they often occasion laughter among the novices. On the other days, instead of tones, a novice had to explain a chapter of catechism to the others as if they were children, and question them in the same way. They had to answer as children, and they certainly did. A worse class could hardly be found in all Christendom. Such laziness, such insubordination, such utter recklessness of reproof and punishment. It was, however, a little overdone, for children, even the worst, are never as bad as that. By the by, I may here say a few words about an analogus, analogous exercise practiced during the third probation by the young priests who are preparing themselves for active service in the society. It is the exercise of confession. But here the novices have their part assigned to them beforehand and have become well prepared, one as a nun with no end of scruples and peccadilloes of her own, another as a devotee laden with the sins of others, another as a trooper, rough and ready, hearty and frank. A man kneels down. He is a Volunteerian workman come to dispute. He is followed by an innkeeper, whose gains are not always of the most honorable sort. And then there comes a monk with an unintelligible confession, having something he does not wish to tell and fears to leave untold. When all these have been counseled, rebuked, and shriven, one after another, then comes the criticism, the most important part. Evidently, though, highly comical and more amusing than many a comedy, this exercise, if of much use to Catholic priests. That's crazy. After catechism, half an hour of manual labor, half an hour of writing or French grammar, a quarter of an hour of private reading of the Imitation of Christ, half an hour over the life of a saint, then a second meditation. Then out in the garden to say their beads. At 7 o'clock, supper, which consists of meat, vegetables, wine, and dessert. At 7:30 to 8:15, recreation, then silence. Silentem Magus begins only to end after breakfast the next day. The litany of the saints is the evening prayer, said by a resident priest, the whole community being present at 8:45, the examination of conscience, and at 9, bed. Recreation among Jesuits is not companionship, or the unbending of the overstrung bow, or friendship, or even hilarity, or outdoor sports such as football or cricket. They, of all use, amuse themselves sadly, for with them, before they can play, they require such a multitude of virtues, such as charity, modesty, cordiality, gaiety, self-collection, piety. And M. de Wicke says, I know not how many more virtues are necessary to pass through the most trying test of the day, a blameless recreation. No lad in a Jesuit college is allowed to choose his own companion, nor are they ever permitted to walk singly. 3 or 4 youths are chosen by the admonitor and especially selected that they may correct each other's failings. A sad, pious mystic with a lad overflowing with fun, an ignorant lad with one fond of studying, a stupid lout with a highly cultivated intellect, and what makes an atmosphere of cautious reserve among them the more marked is that each lad is expected to act as a spy upon his companions and repeat every jest or thoughtless word, or still more each to thoughtful remark, all of which they consider it a duty to report to the admonitor. Therefore, they're tattletales. That's crazy. I'm sorry. Okay. Therefore, as each youth is among watchful enemies, silence is golden for each lad and is ever in danger of being dismissed or unsuitable to the society. That society which to most of them is their only home and protector on earth. for the novices, with exceptions, are very poor. That is so sad. During recreation, they are not allowed to talk about each other in private conversation, but once a week, as we have stated, they have an opportunity of exercising the gift of criticism to its greatest extent, and for serious faults, if they existed, the system of secret denunciation is enjoined under pain of expulsion. The system of watching and prying exists in all and every order of monks and nuns, and it is by that and also by confession these communities are kept in some outward order, but the spite, hatred, envy, and secret detestation of each other in which they, with few exceptions, live, is the outcome of this continual tale-bearing, which places the higher and nobler natures at the mercy of the most slanderous and the most base. This is very sad, you guys. Wow. We have given the experience of M. Dewicki in full, for it is these young men who have undergone this irrational training, who in very few years after become the schoolmasters of the upper classes of all Romanist countries, and the Jesuit confessors of a vast number of women and girls. In the Jesuit schools, they always have young masters of classes called regents who are only a few years older than the pupils themselves. And this is one reason that thoughtful, liberal minds on the continent have given for the degeneracy of the Latin races with such masters trained by such a bad system, what can be hoped for the pupils? Let me reread that. I got to reread that whole paragraph. In the Jesuit schools, they always have young masters of classes called regents, who are only a few years older than the pupils themselves. And this is one reason that thoughtful, liberal minds on the continent have given for the degeneracy of the Latin races, with such masters trained by such a bad system, what can be hoped for the pupils? The early training will not make learned or wise men, but it does make artful flatterers of infinite courtesy and patience, ready and accustomed to make use of the folly and credulity of their fellow creatures, and to do so with such tact that they are invariably forgiven. It is said that the world belongs to people of good manners, and while they are becoming rapidly extinct in all other classes, they are always to be found among the Jesuit priesthood. It is one of the great features of the matchless organization. That is just crazy. And that ends chapter 7, brothers and sisters. Okay. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And embed the Word of God upon the tablets of your hearts, so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Until next time, bye-bye.